Chapter 9, Development of Cognition. As we saw in the previous chapter, the toddler first develops emotionally. The first thing you learn to recognize is your mother. You then start to cognitively define yourself and others. This is the cognitive side of separation individuation. But before this happens, two very important adjuncts to cognitive functioning are preparing themselves to come on the stage. The first is quite easy to understand: time. We have stated that one of the major differences between thoughts and feelings is the fact that thoughts are ordered in time and space. The feeding infant has a sense of time. The infant senses the time, or more importantly, the direction of time as he starts being hungry and ends up being satiated. The infant is fed and satiated, but sometime after, he becomes hungry and satiated and hungry in an ongoing cycle. Similarly, other bodily needs are discovered and dealt with in a timely, orderly manner. But time is ordered by the infant, and at this stage, the infant feels that time is endless, and as infants, we feel we have, at our dispense, rules according to our needs. This trait seems to stay with us all our lives. We all tend to plan time as if we can manage time. As you will see in therapy, many of us are time hungry. Time hungry means that there are not enough seconds in the minutes or hours in the day. We crave for more. Then we behave as if we thought we could control the clock. Poor time management is one of the chief villains in raising our level of stress. Learning how to manage it is a very effective means of lowering tension. The second adjunct is the survival of the fittest thoughts. You will see later, when we are discussing fantasies, why this is so important. You must remember as children, how we gave the quaintest of explanations. We use these explanations in 3 other circumstances when we are adults. We use it in humor, we use it in innovation, and we use it in paranoia. I'm sorry, but this will take a bit of explaining. I want to explain the idea of survival of the fittest thought and why it is so important. As a tree develops in the spring, buds grow all along the twig. Only one bud will become next year's twig. Nature has a way of choosing which, but this would be, and it is always the best bud. This bud will develop into a twig, then a branch, and then a major part of the tree as time goes by. But it starts out as a mere bud. I played this game with my grandson, Harold. He would close his eyes and guess where my hand was, and then open his eyes and look, see. My hand was always in the same place. Gradually, he learned where my hand would be, and then there was no need to ask. Then, there was no need to tell him to close his eyes, and he had no need to open his eyes to check. It sounds simple, but he learned in a couple of attempts. When presented with a problem, children guess they have a number of options, a number of thought buds. They will choose one, and if it works, it stays and develops. All the time, thought buds are bubbling up as possible explanations. I want you to stay with this for a minute. Think about it. How important it is for us to be able to think of different solutions and to choose the best, use it and decide if we want to continue using it. If the thought buds and twigs and even branches are hidden, as they generally are in the automatic thinking, there will be no reason to change the twig and branch. They become a very entrenched thought pattern. I know, I have digressed into pathology, but I'm using it as an example to clarify, and we will use it again when we are talking about pathology. As we have mentioned, there are 2 kinds of thoughts, those that we are aware of and those we are not aware of. We have chosen to call the unaware ones automatic thoughts. There are 4 kinds, those surveying and those supplying possible answers. They are both generated by the budding and best choice process, and when they are inaccurate, we don't know. The other 2 deal with beliefs and fantasy daydreaming. Do not be alarmed, we will explain these. If you remember in the previous chapters, we were comparing ourselves to a spaceship where the commander of the spaceship could refer to his computer. The computer would draw from previous experience, and make us aware that what is going on around us might threaten us whilst we were concentrating on something else. This computer, by using the survival of the fittest buds, will be offering advice. As we will see later, part of this process is comparing and contrasting what we have learned from previous similar behaviors. Again, another problem can arise, and we will deal with this in pathology. Far too often we take a similar situation, an allegory, and convert it into an identical replica of the present situation. We are possibly choosing the right branch, but mistaking the twig, and we don't know. If we are reacting on an automatic level, both emotionally and cognitively, we will be unable to see the difference between the allegorical simile and the reality which is going on around us. You will see when we discuss pathologies, how on losing grasp of reality, allegories become reality. It is as if allegorical explanation becomes reality. This thinking process is part of the automatic everything. Automatic thinking has developed in mankind. The thought comes from the thinking process. The thinking process produces the thought. Your brain produces the way you think. On the other hand, the way you think affects the brain. Your brain develops as you think, and as your brain develops, you think differently, as in a loop or cycle, if you will. In nature, most cycles are negative feedbacks. I can imagine a frown on David's brow. Negative feedback is a very highfalutin way of saying that you are hungry. You eat and become full and the hunger disappears. Hunger causes eating, which diminishes hunger. When you are short of oxygen, you breathe in, oxygen enters the bloodstream and the drive to breathe in diminishes. Nature loves negative feedback. Without negative feedback, we would be doing the same thing forever. This is what happens in obsessive-compulsive behavior. Satisfaction is another negative feedback. Most people cannot seek satisfaction forever. When you are satisfied, you don't seek satisfaction. So, let's go back to our thought process. Here we have a genuinely constructive positive feedback. In my 50 years as a doctor, I find it difficult to think of any other non-pathological positive feedback. But, this cycle or loop is not only non-pathological, it has defined us. The more we think, the wiser we become. The wiser we become, the more we think, and the quality of the though increases. Even more so, the knowledge we have gained becomes automatic, and for me, even more amazingly, the acquiring of this knowledge passes from generation to generation as if it was always there. The older one amongst us will notice how hard it was for us to handle a cellular phone. Our kids were born to them. Our grandchildren handle texting as easily as they can spoon ice cream. For me, there is a 3-generation gap. My generation can text, doing it slowly and with errors. My children text very freely. The elder one uses their fingers, the younger ones and my grandchildren all text using the thumbs. My younger children acquired this by practice, and yet, my grandchildren seem to have been born with the knowledge and ability. I often wonder if this ability to acquire knowledge, as it is handed down from generation to generation, somehow dilutes the positive elation that one feels when discovering something for the first time. Why am I saying this? Imagine, for the first time, someone discovering that there is a God. Could his elation be so ecstatic that it could be comparable to hallucination? I don't know, and I'm sure no one else does. But, having come this far, and having entered into a provocative field, let's stay there. When I was a student, I remember reading in my pharmacological textbook 2 sentences which impressed me no end. The book mentioned why barbiturates got their name. The author explained that the PhD student who had discovered barbiturates dedicated his thesis to the beautiful Barbara, a girl whom he loved dearly. I wondered at the time what he would have done if he was in love with Mikhail. I wish I had his nerve to dedicate this book in a similar manner. But, that was not the point. The second was a commentary he made about some discussing receptors. He spoke like this: we do not know if they exist. It's like a beautiful lady whom we have not seen, but we have written her letters and sometimes she has replied. In the end, they discovered receptors and they have become a staple part of modern pharmacology. Much later, scientists postulated endorphins. The logic was beautiful. In my opinion, if we take morphine, it must sit on a receptor. If there is a receptor, it means there must be some chemical the body is producing which sits naturally on the morphine receptors. This substance, without being known what it was given the name endorphins. I am now going to take a giant leap in logic, and a lot of you are probably not going to agree with me. Nevertheless, I think that we can progress from beyond's description of the cognitive processes. I believe we can add belief. All others believe. When I discuss behavior, I will discuss it as part of the ways we behave. A belief is a thought which is almost coming back to being an emotion. But, why do we have them? If there is a place in our minds and in our beings dedicated to believing, can we not ask the same question and make the same supposition that was made with regard to endorphins? If we believe, there surely must be something to believe in. I am not a religious Jew by any means. In fact, I spent almost as much time berating the religious as I do the pharmacological drug companies. But, there is a big difference between religions and religious. As I've mentioned before, there is so much about how we have developed which is beyond chance and quite miraculous, that to think it is by chance seems to be crass and unimaginative. The fact that we understand certain things does not mean to say that they lessen the wonder that they happen at all. Belief in my schema holds an essential role. As you will see in the next chapter, we learn how to adapt to those around us. We are part of a herd and we need to survive. On the one hand, we need to conform, and on the other, we need to express and maintain our individuality. Beliefs are the third part of automatic thinking. Add them to recall and predicting. One other aspect is overlooked. The fourth aspect, daydreaming fantasies. First, we learn to recall our automatic thinking. But in addition, we learn to fantasize and censor. In the social reaction, we learn to allow ourselves not to actively do an action, but pretend in our head, we imagine. The fantasies may be so heavily censored we have to fight hard not to allow them anywhere near our awareness. This is another explanation for neurosis, and we may not be able to set the partition at all. Is this the psychopath? But, what happens if the process is rigid or poorly developed? I have often noted that not only do post-psychotics not fantasize, but even before their first breakdown, they report a very sparse fantasy world. How do we balance the fact that we would love to have wild sex with the next-door neighbor's wife, or we would love to be so rich to do all the things that they do, or we would love to belong to a class with different beliefs and values? But we do not. So, what do? We daydream. We add forbidden fruits to the repertoire of our thought buds. We know the fruit is there. Yet again, we learn to partition. I am reasonably sure that we need to develop this ability when we are at the mercies of hormones raging at us for the first time. In the storm, we are exposed to new norms and new drives. Strange to tell, but the age of the onset of daydreaming and fantasies is the age of the onset of the cancer of the psychic body, schizophrenia. I will be developing this thought with you. Are fantasies a repository of discarded buds who didn't make the cut? Are daydreams a way of having the best of both worlds? To do so, we must build a firewall around the daydreams. I want to end the chapter and re-entertain beliefs. I hope you have grasped the four parts of the automatic thinking: recall, predicting, beliefs and fantasy, daydreams. I grew up in Lowry's where's there's money Yorkshire. We say, in for a penny, in for a pound. Way back in a grimy but superb Leeds, I was deeply influenced by my Polish granddad. He had one simple saying: I like what is right. My mother would reinforce its message by saying, what is right is right. We knew what is right. Knowing what is right is cognitive and yet, almost emotional. It is something we acquire. It's similar to my grandchildren's ability to automatically thumb type. It is passed on. When I came to Israel, I discovered something which truly amazes me, and I have never received an answer. In Hebrew, North Siphon. Hebrew is and always was quite a logical language. Hence a compass is literally something which makes northspin. In Hebrew, P and F are synonymous. I don't know how the ancient Hebrews knew that magnetic north was actually in the north and an integral part of the magnets and compasses. I am sure there is an explanation. I don't know what it is. However, the linguistics get even more surprising. The Hebrew for conscience is literally to be compassed. Mazpan. The Jews who made their covenant with God and no one else have their own internal compasses. We all do. We all know where the moral north is. Suffice it to say that in my take on religion, Judaism is about that compass and our direct relationship with God. Other religions place someone between us and our magnetic moral north. This is my criticism of any religion which places the teacher, rabbi or prophet as an alternative north. When we discuss therapy and indeed, when we discuss pathologies, I feel that the end stage must always be, are you doing what's right? It's a very simple question, and sometimes there are some very complicated answers. Once you get used to asking the question, you find the answer easy to come by, and often, it makes things very simple. I am suggesting that we have certain innate decisions. They are easy to arrive at. We just follow our internal compass. But, that is not always the cause. In the next chapter, we're going to consider how behavior and learning develop. Until we discover that, what we learned and employ unthinkingly is inappropriate.